Monday morning. There's our float from Friday, super stoked with it. So I talked about how I was gonna mud this floor. Well, I changed my mind, a couple reasons. The minimum mud requirement is 3/4 inches thick, and I'd rather go like 1 inch to 1.25 inches thick. And I really just can't go that thick in this room without giving us too big a thresholds. So I'm gonna do plywood and self-leveler instead. I love mud, it works great. It's a great option, but this big joint here is what's giving me pause. This floor actually checks out the deflection rating. So I don't know if you know this, but there's actually a way to figure out the deflection rating for a joist system in a floor. It's on the John Bridge forum. There's an app called the Deflection Calculator, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. It's always good to check your natural stone floors, especially before you do any prep. So there's two types of deflection in a floor. Between the joists, there's deflection in the plywood, and then running along the joists, there's joist deflection. So those joists flex, and also the plywood in between the joist flexes. You need to consider both of those things when you're laying a floor, especially a marble floor. Marble's super soft, way more prone to cracking. This floor is bomber. We've got just a very solid joist deflection, and by adding another 1/2 inch layer of plywood, we're gonna resolve any deflection in between the joists. Mud would also resolve that, but I just feel like I would have had to go thicker than I can here to really achieve that. So plywood is probably the best option anyway for most scenarios. So I'm gonna show you how I like to install plywood over like a second layer of plywood. So first I'm taking and sanding just a little bit of a hump right here where these two floors meet. So I'm sanding it down as much as I can, just so we don't have any kind of a gap under the plywood right there. So once we get this all sanded down, I'm gonna start cutting in the wood. All right, now that I've got the plywood all carried in, which is what I was dreading the most about this process, I got the floor all sanded down, I got that hump ground down as best as I can. I'm gonna start cutting in the plywood. So contrary to popular belief, when you're installing a second layer of plywood, you want it running the same direction as the first layer. You want it running, my joists are running this way. I want my first layer and my second layer of plywood both running that direction. And this is gonna basically take full sheets through here. But as we get into here where we're gonna have joints in it, you want your plywood joint to sit not right on top of the joist. You want your joint 1/4 of the way between the two joists. So in theory, you've got a pivot point right here. You've also got a pivot point between the two joists in the middle. So we're gonna split the difference and make our joint right there so it's not resting on either one of those pivot points. And I talked about checking for deflection. So the way you do that is you find your joist width, between joists. Mine are 16, it actually goes down to 12 over here. Your length between support underneath them. So there's a wall underneath this floor right about here, and right about here. So my longest unsupported distance in this room is about 8 feet, which is great. Usually it's a lot bigger than that, and that's what is gonna allow us to do a stone floor in here because it's really beefy. So you can plug those numbers into that deflection calculator and it will tell you your deflection rating. And for stone, technically you're supposed to have a 720. For ceramic, you need about a 360. I don't go by that always every single time without question. Kind of depends on the type of framing. A lot of these new I-joists and engineered trusses can hold a lot more weight than this old lumber. But on an older house like this, where it's got actual sawn timbers, trusses, solid wood instead of engineered joists, I always check the deflection rating on it. This one is awesome. This is a super beefy floor. Adding the second layer is gonna decrease that between joist deflection, but the deflection in the joist is super solid and totally suitable for a stone floor, fortunately. So I like to use 1/2 inch AC plywood personally. You can use OSB, it's very dense as well. I like plywood better because things stick to it better. I do not like CDX just because there's too many voids in it. AC plywood, it's got all the voids filled, every little knot hole and things. Super solid product. It's a little more expensive, but it is really the best way to go for your second layer ply. So I'm gonna get that all laid in and cut in, and then I'll mark out where my joists are so I don't screw into those. All right, so here's a couple important things when installing your second layer. I mark all of my joists so I intentionally do not screw into those. You want to screw into the other subfloor, avoiding screwing into the joists, so that this layer isn't directly connected to the joists and absorbing their movement. Rather, it's just attached to the subfloor and it kind of absorbs the movement from that one, if that makes sense. I'm not an engineer, I didn't make it up. That's just the way you're supposed to do it, but it does make sense to me. And then I want screws every 6 inches in the field and every 4 inches along the seams. And another super important thing, don't glue it unless you're gonna do a full spread glue. You can see these chunks of glue. There was some OSB glued down with globs of liquid nails, and it had created voids in between the globs where there was flex in the sheet. So don't glue it unless you're gonna do a full spread, otherwise it's gonna cause you more problems. All right, I got that all installed about 1,000 screws later. Literally, there's at least 1,000 screws in this floor. And then I leave about an 1/8 of an inch gap between the sheets, and I'll just fill those with some fast drying cheap caulk tomorrow. Got some foam perimeter strips installed from my buddy Rod and my son Eli over at Rodcat. Tomorrow I will prime and pour a fiber reinforced self-leveling product called Mape Planitex SLF over this. And it's gonna be about 1/4 inch thick there in the middle and about 1 inch thick down that wall, and then 1/4 to 3/8 thick everywhere else. So it's gonna be a super bomber floor. I mean, this thing is beefy. I feel bad for whoever has to tear it out someday, honestly, but not my problem.